With the bandwidth and devices we have these days, there's really not much of a reason to use small pixelated images. In the late '90s, early 2000s, even people were relying on dial-up or even 3G and slower wireless connections. It was more important to use smaller images so that websites and apps and whatnot wouldn't take so long to load. But with a high-speed 4G and various high-speed landlines we have, we don't need to worry about that anymore. So looking at this little Mario here, it kind of gives you an idea of what a pixel is. A picture element, are these smaller squares basically that make up an image. They're not exactly squares, but this sort of gives you an idea when you see an image like this, where you start to see the individual elements, the squares that make up the image. That's what we call pixelated. It just doesn't look as clear. So I have three images here of ice cream sandwich to demonstrate the difference between smaller images and larger images and how it relates to pixel size. This screen that I'm recording on right now is 1020 pixels wide. The screen itself is almost 2000 pixels this way and 1080 pixels tall. So it's about 2000 pixels this way and about 1000 pixels in this direction. This smaller image of the ice cream sandwich is 200 by 200 pixels. The entire screen is 2000. This is 200. That's why it is only taking up a small portion of the screen when we see it in its actual size. And since it is only 200 pixels, if we zoom in to make it larger, it is still 200 pixels by 200 pixels, except those pixels, are getting stretched out across the screen, so we start to see them because they're getting larger. Again, with modern bandwidth and devices, we don't need to see images like this. Here is a medium-sized image, 610 by 461 pixels. So it takes up a larger portion of the screen. Again, we're looking at just about 2000 or about 1900 pixels this way. This image is 610 pixels wide, so it takes up more of the screen. It's clearer, it's larger. If we zoom in, we're still going to start to see the individual elements, but not nearly as bad as in the first image. In fact, it's barely discernible at all unless you zoom in quite a bit. So when we go to the largest of the photos, the largest image, this image is 2,141 pixels wide and 1,362 pixels tall. So it takes up the full length of the screen. And that way, if the image is large and we can't see the individual pixels, still though, if we zoom in, we start to see the individual elements. But if you want a picture to appear larger on the screen, that's why we need to get a larger photo, this mid-sized photo, because it does not stretch. The pixels do not stretch out enough to be noticeable by most people viewing, and maybe unless you get your head really close. So again, with modern bandwidth and devices with high resolution, high pixeled screens, it is important when dealing with websites or apps or any type of document to make your images with fairly decent resolutions. I recommend one side is around the 600 to 800 mark in pixels, and that will look decent in most cases.